Hello and welcome once again to another episode of 177 Nations of Tasmania. For many of us, images of growing up on a tropical island in the South Pacific may look idyllic. But for Loni, who grew up on a small island in Samoa, day-to-day life was often not easy. Although being part of a strongly collective society means everyone supports each other, it also means everyone has their duties and responsibilities. And that's the way life often was in Samoa. Like many Samoans, Loni ended up migrating to New Zealand to find better work prospects and experienced significant culture shock. Eventually, she would try her luck in Sydney, an even bigger step, where she would eventually meet her now husband, Peter, who you will also hear in this episode. How they met and what she experienced in Tasmania in the early 90s when she first started living here, I'll let Loni tell you for herself. What was the environment that you grew up in? What was it like?
Hard as a child, because everything, it's a collective community where every person, apart from the grandparents because they couldn't work, but right down to like 4 or 5 year olds has a role in the families.
Okay.
Sort of thing, like pick up the rubbish or collect coconuts and stuff like that. But growing up as a child, probably I was lazy and I thought, this is really hard work. And life was hard. Mm-hmm. We've gone through, times where there was a famine and the food on the ground was not enough to feed the family. And we used to make bread, get flour. If we can get flour, we'd make the dough, make out of the coconut cream and flour. And the older generations, like my generations, but my cousins older than used to do that cooking, and then we'd store them to make things last, because this is not just a nuclear family, it's the whole extended family. It's the grandparents, the aunties and uncles and families living together. The education was good, but I found that when I got to high school and finished high school, because I got to form the fifth form, which is probably the equivalent of, but it'll be the equivalent of year 10 here. And my grandfather was very ill at the time, because I grew up with my grandparents most of the time. And my grandma had passed, but my grandfather was still around, but he was very ill at the time. So I decided to not go to school anymore, but to stay home and help with looking after him. And when he passed, I went to Apia and lived there for 12 months to try and find work, and that was hard. I didn't find work, particularly with not having. I sat the national school certificate and passed, but that wasn't enough to get a job. So it was very hard.
And so from what I have read about Samoan culture, the family is very important, and it's the extended family as well.
It's a collective culture. Yes, the family is certainly the main feature of any extent of any communities in Samoa's village life.
Do you have to consult the family when you make certain decisions in your life?
As a child, no. The family pretty much decide everything. So, in the Samoan culture, we have a tiered culture, very hierarchy. Mm-hmm. So the decisions in the family are made by the matais, the chiefs. And the chiefs in those days were mainly the men, but the grandparents in the family are very important. So even though that, you have the matais, the consultation between my parents and, my aunties and uncles are always, their decisions are always, or the advice always comes from the grandparents. My grandfather, who was the patriarch of the family, and my grandmother as well. So the matais, they would meet and make the decisions, any decisions about the family, whether, the division of land for people to live and to work and earn to live on. Anything really concerning the well-being of the family the decisions are made by the matai. And of course, behind every, man is a very strong woman who supports and advice on those decisions. But ultimately, the children have no say in anything. It's like sometimes it's what is it, seen and not heard.
Yeah.
We just do as we were told. The children, even when they are married and have children of their own, because they always seem to congregate in the families, depending on where they would live, the decisions are still made by the chiefs. My parents can raise their children. They worked really hard to put them through education, and that was through raising money from the land. But everyone would have a say in kind of like how the children are brought up. So the expectations are that, your children should be brought up in a certain way. The Samoan cultural societal norms is that you work, you go to school, you go to church. Sunday schools is a huge thing. Growing up in the evenings on Sundays is kind of like, it's a rest day. The only thing that we're allowed to is after lunch that we could play volleyball or netball. And at times swimming was banned on Sundays. And swimming in the ocean, the sea. And when we are caught swimming, we go to, everyone congregates, all the children older to the young ones in the village would go to the church minister's house, and we would go there to the prayers and the singing for that's the routine, and that's what we were expected to do. And and then they would have like leaders, young people who, go out like police and report to the church minister, who was a very scary man. He was big, bald-headed, and very...
Make him sound like a nightclub bouncer or something.
It was a bit like that. But say if anyone was caught swimming, he would have this long, what do you call them? And say, we got caned if we swam on Sundays and got caught.
Yeah, right. That's very strict.
It's very strict. And that's another part of the culture. And growing up as a child, it was a very strict culture, and like beatings and stuff was like the norm. We copped a lot of beatings over the years as a child from my mum and dad. My grandparents were really good.
And because the grandpa was blind and couldn't catch it.
So you got off a bit lightly there.
She deserved it then.
But very strict. And at schools, even schools, that was another beating that you got from the teachers at schools when you were young. You get beatings from everyone, like the church minister, the schools, and your bigger cousins.
Wow. One of the stereotypes I've heard of it is that a lot of Samoan and other islander boys, even though they might be really big and scary, they're all scared of their mums.
That's true. With my mum was very tough. So my parents, my dad was a very placid man. He was kind, and it was very easy to get along with. But my mum was very strict, very, very strict. I have to run really fast. Doesn't matter where you run and how far you go. The stones or the little rocks always gets you.
One of the challenges in my mind with the Samoan society has always been that it's a society in which it's an adult-driven society. And I've never quite understood when a child ceases to be a child and becomes an adult and actually can join in with that particular society. And I've seen examples where some quite elderly young children are still treated quite harshly because they're still being considered children as opposed to adult, which Loni's already referred to.
And one of the other thing too in our culture is that when we sit down for a meal, there's the extended family, so all the adults, the matais, the parents would sit down, the kids eat last, and they eat whatever is left of the meal. But we have one day which is called the White Sunday. That's a really good day because all the children sits on the Sunday. We go to church, we do the things that we do at church, and then we come home. There's a huge feast where all the kids sit down and all the adults serves them. So kind of like the adults become the slaves, the kids slaves for one day.
The kids have a day off. Yeah. And so what sort of activities would be common to do for children in Samoa? Did you have time to sort of do fun stuff in between?
No. Well, we did sometimes. The kind of like the daily routine was in the morning. You get up really early in the morning. You go fetch water because at that time we didn't have the running water in the villages.
Okay.
We had a few wells in the middle of the village, and there's another couple which is quiet inland. So that our routine in the morning is you get up, you go fetch the water for the older cousins to do the cooking for that day. And we go to school, we start at 8 o'clock. There's no breakfast. You can just take, if there was coconuts and stuff, that was good. And so the school went from 8 to 1 o'clock. So we come home and there will be, if you're lucky, some food from the adult meals from 10 o'clock in the morning, at 10 o'clock in the morning. So we come home, we have something to eat, and then we go off, collect coconuts, fetch more water, get firewood, ride to like when it's just before dark. And then the older cousins would do the cooking and stuff. Nighttime was interesting because the moon was out the whole village, like lit up. And so the kids would have like a bit of playtime after the meal, which is just after dark. And then they walk off and then we'll go out and mix and play hide and seek and catch up with friends. There was fun. So the school in those days, we go to school and then we get handed toothbrushes and toothpaste, so we brush our teeth in the morning. And also they used to have the milk biscuits. And we have different flavors, like there was chocolate, there was banana and vanilla, because we didn't have milk. And they were worried, the calcium intake and stuff like that. So they have supplies of that they would deliver to the schools in the villages to distribute. And that was one of the routines. That was one of the exciting things is at lunchtime you get milk biscuits. You'd line up for when the bell goes to get those biscuits, and they were quite nice at the time. Before we were born, my dad was a policeman, and my mum attended teachers college, but she didn't finish because she got kicked out.
Oh, really?
My mum was a very tough lady.
Okay.
But she fought with the men, not the women.
Right.
My grandparents had initially moved from the village on the island where we are, which is called Samoa, to the main island, which is a bit smaller, but that's where the capital city is. That's where all the services and the stuff were. So they moved there to give their children and to have access to education. But eventually my grandparents moved back to our village when the kids were older, and my mum and dad then met, and my dad then finished in the police force and moved to the village. So they became planters. They worked on a plantation. So the plantation it's taro, it's bananas and cocoa and oranges and stuff. But that was how they put us through school. In the villages, each family have their own parcel of land, and some families have got larger lands, like my mum's family and my dad's family had as well in another village. But each family would have their own parcel of lands, and so the matais, the chiefs, talk and make decisions and then allocate for each piece of land to be given to a couple and their children, and so our land on my mum's family was all divvied up by my grandparents. But of course, you have to kind of like make sure that everyone was okay with it. Yeah, so that was how. So they got their own parcel of land, and that's how they live. They do the plantations, they grow.
It's still the way it happens too. Customary land is managed by the Matais, and so you have use of the land, but the broader family may at some stage step in and decide, who might have that home,
Okay. So the crops that's grown on that land, are they just for the family, or is it for is that they use it to make money, I guess?
It's for the families, and they used to make money as well. For example, so my parents we were given this land on the main road, and that was where they worked. So for the oranges and the mandarins, they take to the market, and that's for just purely us, my parents and my siblings, because they have to put us through school. They have to pay for education and to care for us and living and stuff. So the cocoa are taken to the shops, and they used to have, so you used to get the cocoa. That's what I forgot in growing up as a child as well. A lot of work in the plantation collecting coconuts. We then, husk them and get them out. And the next door neighbour had a huge, kind of like a oven, and that's used for drying the cocos and the cocoa beans and the coconuts. And then you put them in huge sacks, and then you take them to 2 villages down where the guy had the family had a big shop where they would take them, they weigh them, and then they give you the money. There's 8 of us, and that was how my mum and dad put us through school.
80. So that would have been a lot of coconuts, I imagine.
A lot of coconuts, a lot of cocos, a lot of mandarins, a lot of oranges, a lot of taro. Christmas celebrations at home used to be, that was the highlight. The church singings and stuff. It was really quite cool in those days, because when we were young, Christmas, and my grandparents were alive, so everyone comes home for Christmas. My aunties lived in other villages and stuff like that, and the cousins who have left home and come to, lived in New Zealand and Australia. So Christmas times, the times that they all come home, or most of them from overseas come home, and we have this huge family gathering that goes for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, depending on how long the people from overseas stays. But they were great times, because we don't usually see each other throughout the whole year, and some people who have come overseas, we don't see them often. Sometimes only some come home for Christmas, but great feasts, celebrations, and we get toys. So this is the exciting bit. So when people come from overseas, they would bring balloons and beach balls and those hard dolls. So if you get a hard doll, that was the presents for Christmas. We don't have trees.
Yeah, I was thinking that would look a bit strange in somewhere like Samoa.
Yeah.
So are there any Christmas traditions that are peculiar or particular to Samoa?
Yes, the church celebrations, the nighttime service, that's a really important church service. Even though Christmas is a time for family gatherings, it's also very much around the church. So we'd go to church on Christmas Eve, and then Christmas Day, I think we do another church service. And everyone's expected to go to church. Particularly when you're a child, you are expected to go to church. And one of my favourite things when I was little at Christmas time is that they used to have from other villages, they would have a busload of people, and they would come so they would walk from one side of the village to down the other end and singing songs. And we'd have, if it's a youth group or a choir, church choir, they'd do that often. And sometimes they would stop in front of a family and they would sing, and then the family kind of have to give them some presents or money.
Singing seems to be a quite important part of the culture in Samoa and some of the other islands as well.
It is. It's a huge part of our culture. church choirs, church singings, and also when they have activities where, because they have a women's committee, and then they would have youth. Yes, a lot of it, is singing. And even when we just get together for a barbecue, even here, so people get together, sit around, and the men, someone will play the guitar and do singing. That's about what it is. Because Samoa became independent, so of course that made just like that free travelling between New Zealand and Samoa as a bit hard. So at the time, the program that was happening is that when if you have a family member in New Zealand, they can get you a work permit. Then that would automatically, if you're lucky enough to get one, you automatically become, when you arrived in New Zealand, become a permanent resident.
Okay.
And that was how I got to New Zealand. So one day my dad came from Savai'i, and he said that my sister had been in contact with my eldest sister, who lived in New Zealand at the time, had been in contact with them, and that she'd found where she worked, she got a work permit, and that she wanted me to come over. At the time, it was hard, and I thought, I don't really, because I wanted to go back to Savai'i to help mum and dad look after the younger kids and work on the land, but I wasn't a very good worker on the land. It was just too hard. And I remember when I was living in Apia, just before Dad came, I used to do the washing at the tap outside, and I used to do the washing, and I used to daydream that I was on a plane going to New Zealand, so I could say goodbye to like washing. But I eventually decided that I was going to go. So then I was on the plane in July going to Christchurch. So my sister was working in a shoe factory in Christchurch. So when I arrived in Christchurch, that's where I worked with her. The climate was a huge shock, because I've never seen snow, summer was always warm. I remember arriving in Christchurch, and it was freezing cold. I'd wore layers and layers of clothes, and with a coat on, and had a heater on running in my room the whole night, which my sister wasn't very impressed with.
So apart from adjusting to the cold, how easy was it to adjust to sort of a new life in Christchurch?
Not very easy. So the language was hard, because even though we learned English at home, we don't use it at home. And so when I got to New Zealand and started to work straight away, it took a long time for me to I had to listen really hard, and people talk really, really fast. So listen very hard. And I think a lot of it was perceiving the information's coming through in a different language. And not only that, but comprehending it. And often I didn't get it right. Like one day I went with a friend to the shop, stopped at the shop after work, because my sister didn't work on that day. And she was going to a hardware shop. And I thought she said that we were going to stop and get some food. And we got there, and I go, oh, okay. Looked around in the shop, and I'm going, where's the food? So she explained to me afterwards that we were going to the hardware shop. We don't sell food there. They don't sell food there. She was looking for some stuff for home. Yeah, it was hard. The language was hard. The food was hard, because they didn't have a lot of Samoan food in Christchurch at the time. So it's like potatoes, things like yogurt and cheese. Never had them in my whole life. Even the things like bananas and oranges, the things that we have at home, tasted so different. It wasn't because they weren't ripened on the tree.
Yeah, they wouldn't have been fresh like they're used to.
Yeah. So the taste was very, very different. And culture was, at home, everything was open, and it was like you could go next door and, and get something that they feed you or stuff, and everything was so open. And then you get to New Zealand where my sister was a housing, public housing. Where they lived was 1, 2, 3, 4 units, and then it was a huge fence around you. You couldn't see out. That was a huge shock. It was very lonely. I was so homesick, and you didn't see a lot of people at all to start with, because I got there and basically the following week I started work and didn't see a lot of people except for when you went to work. You come home, it was just my sister and her husband and my nephew. I was there from, I think, 83 to 89. So I started working in a shoe factory when I got there, and I got sick of gluing shoe heels together. Got sick of working in the factory, and then I took myself to do some courses at TAFE, and I applied for a job at the United Building Society, and then I just struggled through the language and that which I got better at, and other things. It's just purely determination that I wanted to explore and do more. And then I ended up applying for the territorial force, which they called it. And yeah, that was very exciting. It was very hard. When I first joined the army, and my very first weekend, we went on a weekend exercise in Craigieburn. It was a snow mountain, and I couldn't do sit-ups or push-ups because exercises was like going to the gym. We didn't. Our exercise was running around collecting coconuts in the field and stuff like that. So yeah, I applied for the force, and I didn't get through straight away, because when I first applied, I went for the interview. And I was telling him, the sergeant, everything that he didn't want to hear. He asked questions, and I said things like, I don't like being told what to do. I don't like people screaming. I don't like people screaming at me. So he said at the end of the interview, okay, well, we didn't get on so well today. Maybe have another think about 12 months' time and then come back. And that's what I did. So when I went back, he was basically asking the same questions, but I changed all the answers. So, yeah, I got in. After 2 years, because you can apply for citizenship, because I'd already had the permanent residence, I got my New Zealand citizenship, and I thought, yeah, I'm free, I can go anywhere. Again, it was that determination and wanting to be independent, because in our culture we go to other places where families are, because you go and stay with families, whereas I just said to my sister, I'm going to Australia, and I didn't have anyone, any family. I didn't,
okay.
Well, we had families there, but didn't know anybody.
What was the plan when you got to Sydney? Was there one?
Didn't have much plan. The thoughts are I'd go to Sydney and find work and just keep working, because I wanted to go to America, because my friends that we worked at Uniting Building Society, they were doing the same thing, just coming to Australia and working here and then keep travelling to America. So I thought, I might do that. And then I got to Sydney and I got stopped. So I found work. It was easy to find work in Sydney when I got there.
So Loni, what brought you to Tasmania? So what were the circumstances?
My husband.
Yeah, so how did you meet?
We had a blind date, didn't we?
Blind date. So how did that happen?
Through a dating agency.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's the old days.
Yeah, the old days where you go in there and put your name down, register to meet someone, and that was how it came about.
And how long had you been living in Sydney before that?
We met in 1990, didn't we?
I think so, yes.
So it only maybe 6 months.
And so do you remember what that first blind date was like?
I do. We went to a restaurant, I think, in Parramatta or somewhere like that.
Yeah.
Loni ordered seafood, including prawns. I made some sort of comment that she'd probably every bit of it, and she proceeded to put the prawn and shell and legs in her mouth and chew on it just to make the point. She didn't swallow it, but
That would have made quite an impression, I guess.
Yes.
And what about you, Loni? What do you remember about it?
It was a bit awkward because I usually hadn't done all that kind of thing before. And so, yeah, but we had a good night though. The conversation fairly flowing. The food was really good, seafood. Because that's our major staple at home is seafood.
And so how long before you sort of got to the point where you wanted to make it permanent?
So we, following that, had a few dates and then we stopped kind of like for some time. And then one day I was working late at night and I thought I really can't be bothered catching the train home. So I thought I would just ring Peter to see what he's doing, to see if he could pick me up. And he did. And then we started again.
And then you knew it was sort of...
Yeah, we continued dating for quite some time.
well, not really, not too long. I was an old fellow. I was already nearly 40. I had a couple of goals in mind. I wanted to find a woman taller than me so my children would have a chance.
Okay.
Secondly, I wanted to find a woman who was younger than me so she would look after me in my old age.
Okay.
I think I failed on both accounts.
Oh, excuse me.
But at least we had two girls and they're both taller than I.
Okay.
But both content with the height, so I achieved one goal there. But by August 1991, we wed. Yeah, so really didn't take too long to make that decision. We probably both needed it in our lives at that stage. You know how sometimes you're looking, you decide that your life is not quite complete. And now 30 odd years later, we're still here and don't too regularly kill each other or anything like that.
So when did you move to Tasmania?
We came down in January 92 because was it 3 months before the wedding, Peter got a posting to Tassie, to Hobart, because he was in the army. And we came down and that's where we stayed. Or we stayed here. And all his families live here.
And what were your first impressions of Tasmania?
It was very much like a white society. When we came down, I was very wary of people looking at me. Sometimes, because when we came down here, I felt very isolated, and I didn't see many coloured people on this side of Hobart. And so it was kind of like when you go to the shopping centres like Eastlands and stuff, like people kind of stare at you. And it get me really upset because and sometimes in shops, services and stuff like that. So I always think why, you'd be standing on a queue and, some of our other people come and they immediately pay attention to them or ask them if they needed help. And I'd be standing there going, oh, okay. So it was that type of thing that used to upset me when I first came down here. And I didn't look like people looking at me like I'm some sort of alien from outer space.
Yeah, I guess that would also depend very much on what area of Hobart you were in, because like probably Sandy Bay, you'd be a bit more fit in a little bit more.
Yeah.
I think for Tasmanians 30 years ago, to see people of a race was a curiosity as much as anything else.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people might look because, I haven't seen this before. And I recall, for instance, when I went to high school here, we had one non-European person at that school, and that was Richard and Catherine Chung. So in 800 students, there were 2 Chinese students. That was in total. So they were a curiosity too. You didn't go out of the way to discriminate against them, but they were curiosity.
But have you found that, that has changed over the time that you've been here?
Oh, it has. It significantly. One of the things that I used to, when I first came down here and had that feeling of, isolation, when I go to shops or I go out to town or stuff like that, I'm always looking out to see if I can see someone, with brown coloured skin and I get very excited when I see people of different culture, different colour here. Things have changed over time. I mean, one of the things that was when my children went to school, they went to Cambridge Primary School down here. I was actually not surprised, but I knew that because when I went to the hospital or the local medical clinic when the girls were babies and have to do that check, someone put me in touch with the Cook Islander lady, and I rang her. We made that connection and found out that her children goes down here as well. The children were a bit older than our girls. And then over time, a lot of the refugees were resettled down here, and I had the opportunity to work as a volunteer with the Catholic Care in the multicultural program where the refugees were resettled down here. That was a really good feeling of, knowing that, there's lots of people coming to Tasmania of different colours and stuff and different cultures. It was just an exciting time.
You can't worry about it too much now because your two granddaughters are little whiteys.
Yeah, but definitely things have changed, and attitude as well have changed. There's certainly a lot of compassion with the locals about people resettling down here, and it's kind of I don't give it a second thought, or I don't get upset when people look at me. I know I'm not the only different colour person down here, so make life a lot easier. Funny thing though, because when I met Peter, I didn't know that Tasmania existed, or didn't know where it.
Yeah, and so what did you do when you first arrived here? Did you also come here and work?
Just got pregnant. That's it.
Okay.
So I got pregnant when we first year we moved down, and then subsequently had another child, had our second child. But I did family daycare because when I came down, it was even worse than going to Sydney because I didn't have anyone here, any families, and it was very isolating, very homesick. So I took up family daycare while the kids were little. And then when they started going to school full-time, I enrolled in a Diploma of Community Services at TAFE. So after family daycare and the kids were older, still at school, I worked at Child Protection as a support worker. I worked there for 8 years and did different roles. The good thing about that was working casually, because we always make sure that one of us is home for the kids. So I worked only in school times.
So what would you say would have been the biggest challenge that you've found trying to settle in Tasmania, especially at the beginning, I guess?
I think it will be, again, culture shock and isolation. Mm-hmm. Because things were very different in Sydney, like Sydney and Melbourne. Sydney was a big city and there's a huge, Pacific Island community there, but just the Samoan community in itself, it's huge. And down here, when we first came down, the biggest challenge was missing my family. Yeah.
It was probably missing your family, but also learning to live with the people down here. This new family that you had married in.
Yeah.
Learning to live with me and my expectations.
That was a huge,
Mum died 14 days after our first child was born.
Oh, wow. That's a pretty big deal.
And so Lon desperately, and I didn't appreciate this until years later, wanted to get home.
Yeah.
And I said, Jess is 2 weeks old. You can't take Jess back at this stage. She's going to be very vulnerable and all the rest. And so Lon agreed, but it probably wasn't until years later I realised that the sacrifices that was required of her to do that. We went back 12 months after that, and Jess was then 12 months older, and I was comfortable with that, but I was unaware of. Because it's common sense to me. You can't go back. Your child is 2 weeks old. You can't take her back into this foreign environment and all the rest. But there you go. That was those sorts of issues.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially after what you've talked about with the closeness of families.
My sisters helped. Well, my sisters also suggested that because was it 1989 or 1990 and 1991, there were two hurricanes in Samoa where devastations like wiped some villages. Our village, pretty much along the coast, was wiped out. And so my sisters also were concerned that Jess was very vulnerable and too little to be taken into, because a lot of I don't think people haven't fully recovered, and so there were issues about toilets, sanitaries, and health. But it was that was a very trying time for me. Yeah,
it just made sense to me. Common sense, you can't do that.
Yeah,
it was and I think that was a huge challenge, marrying into a Palangi family, because I've not had, yes, I had Palangi friends, but I've not lived with a Palangi family. And a lot of the stress I experienced at the time was always worrying about the expectations of the family and how people would see me, and what they think of me, if they are going to accept me into the family, those sorts of things. And then coupled with, with that, my mum leaving because, and then the struggles that followed after mum passing away was, I could always see mum with my kids, because that was a huge thing, was that she didn't get to see my kids. She didn't get to see Jess, because the conversation that I had with mum was 2 weeks after Jess was born. I just managed, because we sent a telegram in those days. We didn't have phones or anything, because they have to travel to the post office to call us. But when we finally spoke on that phone that night, I had so I got Jess in the bassinet, just sitting on the bench, and I was trying to make her awake or make noises so mum could hear. And just she did. But immediately after the phone call, mum had this, because she has high blood pressure.
Yeah.
So she had a stroke, and was taken to the hospital, but she didn't make it to the hospital. So that was the biggest what was a huge challenge.
Yeah.
It was always, every time I pick Jess up or just cry, I'd see mum's face. Kind of like, picking her up, because even though mum was tough, she was, she loved the grandchildren that she got to know and seen, and had the opportunity to be with them, spend time with them. That was what she was like. A lot of challenges, but I think the cultural differences between our families was a huge challenge for me as well.
Well, Lon didn't communicate that particularly well. She soldiered on. It wasn't obvious to me, because you might be like me. Things are common sense. It's common sense, and it's only in hindsight that I'm more aware of the challenges that Lon had when she first arrived. I thought everything's fine, stuff like this. But there you go. But that was really tough. It was a really, really
too.
tough thing. She spoke to her mother, put Jess on the line, had a call about 3 or 4 hours later from Samoa to say, your mother has passed away the same night.